Good morning, class. We begin today with the election of 1836. By 1834, the Democratic Republicans had taken on the name simply of Democrats. The opposing party, here we've got simply Democrats. The opposing party, which was being led by Henry Clay, had taken on the name simply of Whigs. This was a magical name closely associated with patriotism back during the Revolutionary War. The Whig Party's chief cement was hatred of Jackson and hunger for political office. The leading favorite son was William Henry Harrison. General William Henry Harrison of Ohio, the so-called battle, a hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe, the hero of the Battle of the Thames. Martin Van Buren of New York was chosen by Jackson to be his hand-picked successor. His vice presidential candidate will be Richard M. Johnson. Here you have the Democratic ticket, one of their campaign posters, liberty and equal rights. And he was known as the Little Magician. And here he has, can't see it very well, but there's a flag flying out that says Magician. And he is shining his light for liberty and equal rights. Democratic ticket for Martin Van Buren, Vice President Richard M. Johnson. And here it is, this is his hand-picked successor. Here you have Jackson carrying Vice President Martin Van Buren to the Capitol. He forces his favorite upon the party. By now, Jackson is nearing 70, too old and ailing to consider a third term. Unfortunately for the Whig Party, Van Buren will win 170 to 73 in the Electoral College. And South Carolina, that hotbed of agitation. Here you have them with their own candidate. In the popular column, much closer, 51 to, oops, come back down. Yeah, going the wrong way there. Well, what is wrong with this? Come on. 51 to 58, much closer in the, oh, wait, yeah, here, popular. 51, no, not close even in the popular, sorry. And in the electoral, landslide for Martin Van Buren, 58%. And see him here in the blue. And you even have Daniel Webster taking his singular state of Massachusetts. So both South Carolina and the state of Massachusetts running their own candidate. And Martin Van Buren's inauguration, not held outside. Maybe they were having some bad weather or some such a thing. Held in the old house chamber of the Capitol. And here you have short, bald Martin Van Buren being sworn in on the Bible in front of Congress and other members. Here you've got the galleries filled with visitors. Martin Van Buren is the 8th president, the first to be born under the American flag, an accomplished wire puller and spoilsman. He was known as the Wizard of Albany, New York, of course. He was also a statesman of wide experience in both legislative and administrative life. In intelligence, in education, and training, he was above the average of the presidents since Jackson. Easygoing though, Martin Van Buren seemed to rattle about in the military boots of his predecessors. The people felt let down. They were used to the active, energetic, loud, boisterous ex-president Jackson. He inherited Jackson's mantle without his popularity. The polished New Yorker also inherited the ex-president's numerous vengeful enemies. Worst of all, Van Buren inherited the searing depression from Jackson. Much of his energy would be devoted to the purely negative task of battling the panic. What has happened here is Jackson has put through an awful lot of legislation, much of it not based on good logic, simply whether Jackson personally liked it or not. And he has vetoed, he was known as King Veto. He has vetoed quite a bit of legislation. And now things will come to roost. Oftentimes, when legislation is vetoed, it takes a little while for the impact of it to be felt. And so Jackson leaves office still riding on the crest. The impact of his decisions, such things as his killing of the Bank of the United States, specie circular, over-speculation, things like this now come to roost right as Martin Van Buren is coming into office. Is this because of Martin Van Buren? No, it's because of the outgoing predecessor's decisions. But unfortunately, Van Buren will spend his 4 years in office doing nothing but fighting the panic, the recession, the depression that takes place under his administration. About the time he is leaving office, things will finally begin to be picking up. But who will get the blame for it? Jackson? No, Van Buren will, because it hits during his administration. In 1837, no sooner does he get into office than the Depression takes place. Hardship was acute and widespread. American banks collapsed by the hundreds, carrying down with them millions in government funds. Prices dropped. The sale of public lands dried up. Factories closed their doors. Unemployment was everywhere. Philip Hone, a New York businessman, described a run on a bank in his diary. The savings bank also sustained a most grievous run yesterday. They paid 375 depositors $81,000. The press was awful. The hour for closing the bank is 6:00 p.m., but they did not get through the pain of those who were in at the time till 9 p.m. I was there and witnessed the madness of the people. Women nearly pressed to death, and the stoutest men could scarcely sustain themselves, but they held on as with a death's grip upon the evidences of their claims, and exhausted as they were with the pressure, they had enough strength to cry, "Pay! Pay!" Present-day changes would not come until the next century, with the Federal Reserve System put through under President Wilson. A few years later, we will have FDIC, the Federal Insuring of Funds, and that was put through under FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, do we know much about President Martin Van Buren? No. Most people, when you ask them, what do you know about Martin Van Buren? They say absolutely nothing. Well, later when people ask you, what do you know about President Martin Van Buren? You're going to say absolutely nothing, because we pretty much are going to skip his administration, because he spends his whole administration simply battling the panic, trying to get us out of this horrible recession. And the next election, 1840, and you will see the exact same candidates from before. 1836, Martin Van Buren with Johnson and William Henry Harrison. Now, you see Martin Van Buren with William Henry Harrison. What you do not see is Johnson. He actually ran with no vice presidential candidate. Well, as it turns out, since he didn't win a second re-election, shoot, Mickey Mouse could have run against him and won. When you are president during a recession, yes, we're beginning to finally come out of it. It's run its course. But people aren't going to see that we're finally coming out of it. All they're going to know is you are president during hard times and you didn't fix it. Anyone could have run against him and won. So it doesn't matter the fact that he didn't run with a vice president. But his vice president will be John Tyler. Incidentally enough, he no sooner gets in office than he dies, and John Tyler takes office. John Tyler will annoy the nation no end, because he will refuse to appoint a new vice president. Our Constitution is very short. It didn't foresee every eventuality. And apparently it doesn't demand that should a president die and the vice president takes over, that vice president must appoint a new sitting vice president. So now, if he had won the election, or somewhere between his winning the nomination and 5 months later taking office, I am sure he would have had to have appointed a vice president. But since he didn't win the election in November, by the time you take office in March, he didn't have to worry about having a vice presidential candidate. So the same people are running again. The Democrats once again renominate panic-tainted Van Buren. They had no acceptable alternative to what the Whigs were calling Martin Van Ruin. To not have run him would have been an admission that the party had run an unsound candidate 4 years earlier in 36. The Whigs turned once again to their ablest vote-getter, General Harrison. The aging hero was nearly 68 when the campaign ended. He was a small-bore candidate. Incidentally enough, he was the oldest candidate to run for president until Ronald Reagan surpassed him, not with his first election, but with Reagan's second election. Now, we have since surpassed that, and Donald Trump has beat out both William Henry Harrison and Ronald Reagan's record for being the oldest candidate to be elected. William Henry Harrison had been successful in civilian life and in military life, notably at the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Thames. Because of that huge victory at the Battle of Tippecanoe, he was nicknamed Old Tippecanoe. He was then living quietly in a 16-room mansion located on a 3,000-acre farm in North Bend, Ohio. His views on current issues were only vaguely known. He was nominated primarily because he was issueless and enemyless. They published no platform. They hoped to sweep their hero in by a frothy huzzah for Harrison campaign. They didn't care if he knew what the issues were. They had no intention on this 68-year-old man running the country. No. Instead, Henry Clay, as Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, the heads of the party, would run the country. And he would simply sign paperwork when they put it in front of him. And so you just smile and wave, smile and wave. Whig propagandists made merry with little Matty Van Buren, whom they called the Flying Dutchman. Martin Van Buren, you don't get more Dutch than that. Remember when we discussed the New York, he's from New York, the Dutch background, 3 of our presidents having come from New York, Martin Van Buren and the 2 Roosevelts, yes, the Flying Dutchman. Although reared in poverty, he was now denounced as a supercilious aristocrat who wore corsets and ate French food with golden teaspoons from golden plates. Jackson's rough-timbered Democratic Party, deeply rooted in the West, was thus saddled with an aristocrat from the East. The Whig campaign song proclaimed, "Old Tip, he wears a homespun shirt. He has no ruffled shirt wirt. But Matt, he has the golden plate, and he's a little squirt wirt." Oh, these made-up candidates. In the hands of these political characters, they created a candidate that did not exist. Here, he is living in a 16-room mansion. Oh, no. They created him as living in a 1-room cabin, swilling down hard cider like the common man. Here they have General William Henry Harrison, and he's swilling cider with his army buds, always playing up that military background. Harrison and Tyler too. Once again, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. They, for campaigning, even have a little log cabin they've built that they can haul around on a little wagon from town to town as they dun 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 dun, woo! And their jug of hard cider. Whenever asked about the issues, the Whigs never discussed it. Well, what do you feel about such and such? Dun 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 dun. Tippecanoe and Tyler too never would discuss the issues because they didn't know where their candidates stood on the issues. They didn't care where their candidates stood on the issues. They simply wanted to get into office. And then the politicians would take care of how they stood on the issues. They didn't want to know where he stood on the issues. Here, 4th of July campaigning, Harrison and reform. Once again, that log cabin. Tippecanoe and Tyler too, that log cabin. William Henry Harrison for president. Celebration in honor of the glorious victory of the Thames. Harrison and reform. And of course the log cabin. We will take him from the plow. Oh, yes, he was still plowing at 68. No, I don't think so. William Henry Harrison, the farmer of North Bend. His log cabin is hard cider, and he's out still plowing the fields. Meanwhile, Martin Van Buren, remember, he had his first term been dragged to the White House by Jackson, and he is still going to try and get back to the White House, but he's got to get all over these log cabins in this hard cider. It's a hard road to toe to get back to the White House. Meanwhile, he's being shown the road back to Kinderhook. He is from Kinderhook, New York, to Kinderhook. This will be very important here. Very soon we will discuss this. Once again, the hard cider of Harrison and the log cabin is almost derailing poor Martin Van Buren. And in this electoral vote, William Henry Harrison, the Whig, this time wins electorally with a landslide. And the popular vote is a good majority, 53% to 46, almost 47%. And you have less than a quarter of 1% going to an independent candidate, but not even hardly worth counting. Harrison wins pretty well evenly throughout the whole nation. And Martin Van Buren, the man, he will run 3 times for the presidency. He will only win the first time. He won the first time in 36, loses in 40, and he will run 1 time more, but he will lose that time also. His wife will bear him 4 sons, but she will die long before he ever enters the White House. Hannah Hose Van Buren, beautiful woman. And yes, in his very early days, he did have hair, but very early on lost it. Short and bald. He was known his whole life long for what was known as mutton chops. Like these big fluffy sideburns that came all the way down almost to his mouth. All the pictures you will ever see of him, young and old, always had these big bushy sideburns. They called them mutton chops. I was going to say, come back here, you can see every picture of him, those mutton chop sideburns. That was his choice. I think that was, yeah. No sooner did he set himself into the White House when his eldest son marries, and he marries Angelica Singleton, who then becomes Angelica Singleton Van Buren, and she will take over as his first lady. She will do all the duties of the parties and etc. for him. She is considered to be one of the most beautiful first ladies we have ever had. Unfortunately, she will annoy many of the Americans by a particular habit that she had. When you read his biography online on D2L, pick up what was it that she liked to do that so annoyed common America. And it no longer is standing, so I could not get a picture of his birthplace, merely a drawing of where he was born and grew up. As an adult, very successful, and Linderwald in Kinderhook, New York, is where he raises his family and where he goes to after he leaves the White House. This is where his 4 sons are raised. His tombstone, and it lists his wife, and she dies much, much earlier than him, only lives to age 36. Her burial tombstone. And some stamps of Martin Van Buren. Oh, loved those mutton chops. And we have just had the election of 1840. And William Henry Harrison and his vice presidential candidate, John Tyler, has won. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Well, out of that campaign has come some very memorable sayings. You know what? Let's go back here first. The real leaders of the Whig Party regarded old Tippecanoe as little more than an impressive figurehead. Daniel Webster as Secretary of State, and Henry Clay, the uncrowned king of the Whigs and their ablest spokesman in the Senate, would grasp the helm. The aging general was forced to rebuke the overzealous Clay and pointedly remind him that William Henry Harrison was president and not Henry Clay. Unluckily for Clay and Webster, their schemes soon hit a fatal snag. The Tyler too part of the Whig ticket, hitherto only a rhyme, now claimed the spotlight. After the longest inaugural address ever written by the great orator, Daniel Webster, it was a 2-hour event given in the sharp blowing wind. Martin Van Buren's inauguration had taken place indoors. Well, for whatever reason, maybe there had been bad weather, rain or snow or something. But William Henry Harrison's inauguration takes place outside. Is it still good weather? Well, it's not raining and it's not snowing, but it's not really perfect weather either. There is a sharp blowing wind, and the president, William Henry Harrison here, being sworn in over the Bible, he gives a 2-hour address, inaugural address. Can you imagine standing out here? Who knows how well you're hearing? This is before modern amplification. And this man is giving a 2-hour inaugural address written by the great orator Daniel Webster. The problem was, at 68 years old, he wanted to prove to the nation that he could stand up to the rigors of office. He was not too old. I can give this 2-hour speech. Unfortunately, he just has his suit on. He does not have a big, heavy jacket. It is March. It is cold. There is a whipping wind. He has no hat on his head. And in that whipping cold wind, he develops pneumonia. 31 days later, he is dead. So much for long speeches. But what I'm getting back to is one of the most famous phrases, something we probably hear at least once a week, is the phrase that came out of this campaign. keep the ball rolling. And where that comes from is William Henry Harrison. A group of Harrison supporters rolled a huge ball, and as you see, they've got their issues and different things all written on this massive paper ball. They rolled it from Kentucky to Baltimore. This is like carrying the torch across the nation when it's an Olympic year. It's a big publicity stunt. Everybody comes out to see the torch go by. Well, everyone came out to see, and remember, this was a rah-rah campaign. Who cares about the issue? To see this huge ball being rolled clear across from Kentucky to Baltimore, where the National Convention of Young Men was held. And the rallying cry was, keep the ball rolling on to Washington. So after we have our National Convention in Baltimore, let's get our candidate to Washington. So keep the ball rolling on to the White House, the Capitol. Get our man into the presidency. Keep the ball rolling on to Washington. So from this campaign, this election of 1840 to this day, when progress on something slows down, someone may say to you, come on, keep the ball rolling, meaning keep the momentum going. Let's keep the action happening. That comes from Tippecanoe. Good old William Henry Harrison, shortest presidency we have ever had, 31 days, 1 month. And someday on Jeopardy, you will know the answer. You haven't had anyone say to you, and someday on Jeopardy, you will know the answer. For over a month, you needed to hear that, didn't you? And another expression you hear all the time. Every time you hear me give a lecture, you hear it several times. This is one of my little things that I constantly say without even realizing I am saying it. And that is okay. Probably the best known, most used expression in the United States, if not the world. You can put a camera in front of some kids in China, and you may even see them giving the peace sign and say, okay, okay. Or you can go to Timbuktu in Africa, and you may hear someone say, okay, okay. This is an expression known around the world. And where does it come from? It comes from Martin Van Buren, another one of our unknown presidents. He is from Old Kinderhook, New York. And the supporters created the OK Club for Old Kinderhook. While Old Kinderhook lost the election, the expression remains today. So once again, someday on Jeopardy, when they ask, where did the term okay come from? You will know one of our little known presidents, our Dutch in background president, Martin Van Buren from Kinderhook, New York. So zing, zing, twice in one lecture. What you needed to know for Jeopardy. And since he is now dead, William Henry Harrison, the man, and two artists' conception of him passing away. His wife will bear him the most progeny of any president. 10. Progeny is your children. 10. Now, his successor, John Tyler, will have more than him, but not while he is president. He will come to office with 8 children. His wife will die while he is president, and John Tyler will remarry. His second wife will bear him an additional 8 children, but not while he is president. So I don't know if you get to count that as children while president. Obviously, they were born after the fact. So if that's the case, William Henry Harrison still holds the record of the most children while president. He is known for his military background, victor at the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Thames. So many of his portraits, drawings, paintings are with him in military uniform. He also served as governor of Ohio and worked in capacity as territorial governor in Indiana. Home originally in Ohio, and as it exists today, if you were to go visit it, they've made some architectural changes, changed the roof line to increase the size of the porch, and this other entrance has also changed. They've taken off the overhang. And I don't know if this was connected before. Right now they have it connected now. I cannot see the angle as to what's going on this side. But yes, you may go and visit his home in Grossland, Ohio. His burial marker, quite an impressive burial stone for a man who was president only 31 days. And he comes from quite a political background. His father was Benjamin Harrison, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He is 9th President of the United States. And his grandson, who is named after his great-grandfather, so father, son, this is not son, this is grandson, is Benjamin Harrison, 23rd President of the United States. Now, well, what is his father doing? Well, he's not chopped liver either. His father, in between, is John Scott Harrison, and he would serve for 4 years in the House of Representatives from Ohio. So this family has been in American politics for quite a few years. Very distinguished American family. And as it just so happens to turn out, if you like to watch Pawn Stars on TV, the one from Arizona, I don't think I have it here, no. When I cover him, I've got it in there. The TV show Pawn Stars, the Harrison family that runs that, they trace their lineage back to the Harrisons as well. And stamps of William Henry Harrison. Once again, keep the ball rolling on to Washington. Yes. And remembering the fact that he worked as governor of the Indiana Territory as well. And thus ends William Henry Harrison. And we will conclude the lecture at this point.